The outcasts of the stars. The chamber of the Galactic Council was a cathedral of power. Hundreds of delegates from dozens of worlds sat upon their lofty tiers, their robes and crests shimmering under the pale light of the station's artificial sun. Each voice was amplified by technology, each word carefully recorded by drones that floated silently overhead. At the heart of the chamber stood Rath, High Speaker of the Klyari. His slender frame trembled under the gaze of the assembled powers. His skin, translucent and pale, seemed as fragile as glass. Even his breathing sounded brittle. Yet he raised his voice, desperate to be heard. "We come not as beggars," Rath said, though he knew the council would hear him as nothing else. "We come as survivors. Our homeworld has been scoured by fire. Our fleet shattered. We ask, no, we plead for sanctuary. A world where our children may live without fear." The silence that followed was not kind. From the Threxian pit, a warlord chuckled, the sound like grinding metal. "Your fleets were shattered because you are weak. The galaxy has no place for those who cannot defend themselves." A ripple of laughter followed from the Kraith delegates, their mandibles clicking in amusement. Rath clenched his hands together, though his thin fingers shook. He had expected ridicule, but the weight of it still crushed his spirit. "We can offer knowledge," he tried again. "Our people have studied medicine, energy, and the sciences of life. We may not fight with claws or steel, but we—" A booming voice interrupted him. "The galaxy does not need scholars too frail to stand. Your knowledge is dust if your kind cannot survive the simplest conflict." It was the tall Dominion's representative, a creature built like living stone. His words were final, delivered with the arrogance of a species that believed only in conquest. The council's speaker, a towering Avrith with wings folded neatly behind her, spread her hands. "The matter is settled. The Klyari bring nothing the galaxy requires. We will not waste resources sheltering a race destined to fade." A low murmur of agreement filled the chamber. Rath felt the judgment like a knife. He bowed his head, unable to stop the sting of shame from reaching his eyes. Around him, the other delegates turned away, already moving to new debates, their contempt so complete that his people's suffering was not even worth further mockery. The Klyari were dismissed. The refugee fleet drifted in silence beyond the station's shadow. Dozens of fragile ships, patched together from the remnants of their once proud civilization, floated like hollow bones against the endless night. Inside, families huddled together, thin bodies wrapped in what cloth and warmth they could find. Children whimpered, their bell-like voices weak with hunger. Rath returned to them with empty hands. He looked upon his people, and the weight of failure nearly crushed him. "We are denied again," he said quietly. His voice cracked, and for the first time in his life, he did not try to hide his despair. "The council will not help us. To them, we are already dead." A silence spread through the chamber. Then one of the elders, frailier even than Rath, spoke. "If not the council, then where? We cannot keep drifting between the stars." Rath hesitated. There was one world, whispered of in backroom channels, ignored by the council because it was young and stubborn. Its people were not part of the galactic order. They had no voice in the council, no fleets of conquest, no ancient empire. They were by galactic measure insignificant, but they had a reputation. Earth, Rath whispered, tasting the word. The humans, a race rumored to be unpredictable, fierce, and, most strangely of all, compassionate. They had only just stepped onto the interstellar stage, but stories traveled fast. Humans who sheltered the broken, who defended the weak not for profit, but because they could not stand to see cruelty win. The elders exchanged uncertain looks. "They are primitive," one murmured. "Perhaps," Rath admitted, "but they are not like the others. If there is even a chance that they will hear us, then it is a chance we must take." He turned to the star map. Their ships were failing. Their people were dwindling. Yet within the black sea of the galaxy, there was one star burning blue and bright, one world untouched by council decrees. "Set course for Sol," Rath commanded, his voice steadier now. "If the galaxy has no place for us, then perhaps humanity will. As the refugee fleet turned its fragile hulls toward the distant sun, a spark of hope flickered where despair had reigned. The Klyari, rejected by the galaxy, now placed their fate in the hands of a species no one trusted, yet no one dared underestimate. And thus, the outcasts of the stars began their journey to Earth. A fragile plea. The Klyari fleet emerged at the edge of the Sol system like drifting ghosts. Their ships were scarred, their hulls patched with mismatched alloys, engines straining against the long voyage. To human eyes, they looked less like starfarers and more like relics from a forgotten war. The moment they crossed the boundary of Neptune's orbit, alarms blared in Earth's orbital command. Tracking satellites lit up, flagging the strange signatures. Within minutes, a dozen human warships rose from their stations, sleek vessels of steel and composite plating, bristling with railguns and missile batteries. For the Klyari, the sight was terrifying. To them, humanity's warships were monsters, hulking beasts compared to their fragile crafts. Some of the refugees wept, convinced they had traded one executioner for another. On the bridge of the lead refugee ship, Elirath forced his trembling hands to remain steady. He opened a channel, his voice echoing across the void. "This is Elirath of the Klyari people. We come in peace. We beg for sanctuary." In orbit above Earth, Commander Lena Ortiz of the United Terra Navy leaned back in her chair, studying the transmission. She was a soldier, trained to expect deception, yet what she saw before her was not a threat. The alien on her screen looked as though the weight of existence itself might crush him. His skin was pale as porcelain, his frame delicate enough that a stiff wind might topple him. And his words carried something she did not often hear from alien mouths: desperation, stripped bare of pride. Ortiz turned to her officers. "Give me the assembly. Now." Hours later, the Klyari delegation stood within the halls of the Terran Assembly in Geneva. It was the first time many humans had seen them in person, and the reaction was immediate. Gasps echoed as Elirath and his companions entered, their translucent skin glimmering under the chamber lights, their steps careful, almost fragile. They looked like glass statues come to life. News outlets around the world broadcast the event. Within minutes, headlines spread. First refugee aliens arrive on Earth. Who are the Klyari? The porcelain people seek shelter. Elirath's voice quavered, but he stood tall as he addressed humanity's leaders. "We are not warriors. We have no armies left. We have only knowledge and the will to survive. The Council calls us weak. They deny us sanctuary. But we ask of you, please, do not turn us away. Give us a home, and we will give what we can in return." His words lingered in the chamber. For a long moment, silence reigned. The assembly erupted into debate. Some representatives whispered of danger. If we harbor them, the Council will see it as defiance. Do we want war with powers that dwarf us? Others saw opportunity. If they bring knowledge, if they help us advance, we cannot afford to refuse. And some spoke with conviction, their voices rising above fear. We call ourselves human. What does that mean if we turn away the homeless? If we abandon those who have nowhere else to go, then we are no better than the galaxy that scorned them. As debates raged, the world outside responded. In the streets of New York, citizens held signs, "Shelter the lost." Strength in compassion. In Beijing, millions tuned into state broadcasts, watching with fascination as humanity's role on the galactic stage shifted before their eyes. In Nairobi, religious leaders called the Klyari a test of humanity's soul. And in small towns across the planet, people gathered around screens, marveling at the porcelain-skinned strangers who had come so far only to ask for safety. At last, the assembly voted. The decision was broadcast live across Earth and directly into the Klyari ships waiting in orbit. The Speaker of the Assembly, her voice steady, declared, "By the will of humanity, the Klyari shall have sanctuary. They will not be turned away. Weak or not, they are people, and no people shall be left homeless if Earth can give them shelter." On the refugee ships, tears filled Elirath's eyes. For the first time since his homeworld had burned, hope surged through his chest. Around him, his people embraced, their frail bodies trembling not with fear, but with joy. Commander Ortiz escorted Elirath out of the chamber later that night. She studied him quietly before speaking. The galaxy rejected you because they think strength is only in power. But humanity, she paused, her gaze sweeping toward the city lights of Geneva. Humanity has a different definition. You'll see. Elirath bowed his head, his voice breaking. We have been called fragile all our lives. But in your kindness, Commander, we see something stronger than any fleet. Above them, the refugee ships glimmered against the stars, no longer symbols of despair, but of a new beginning. And on that night, the Klyari found not just shelter, but the first spark of belonging. Shelter turns to strength. The first weeks on Earth were bewildering for the Klyari. In the refugee quarters outside Nairobi, Elirath walked among his people as they adjusted to their strange new home. The air was thicker, the gravity heavier than their own world, yet the humans had built living spaces designed for their frailty, temperature-controlled, filtered against the pathogens that might overwhelm them. Children played in gardens for the first time in years, their delicate voices rising in laughter that seemed too fragile to last. Human volunteers worked alongside them, showing patience that startled the Klyari. No one mocked their weakness here. No one turned away when their trembling hands failed to lift heavy tools. Instead, humanity simply adapted, filling in the gaps with ease. It was alien, in its own way, this stubborn kindness. Elirath sat in a research facility weeks later, watching as his scientists hunched over human equipment. Dr. Sapphira, a young Klyari biologist, adjusted a microscope and gasped. These humans, she whispered, their immune systems, so adaptive, so chaotic. No other species could survive this range of pathogens. Beside her, a human doctor chuckled. We've always thought of it as being cursed. Too many illnesses, too many vulnerabilities. But if you think it's special, it is more than special, Sapphira interrupted, eyes wide. It is revolutionary. With human resilience and Klyari knowledge of genetic modulation, we could cure half the plagues that haunt the stars. The collaboration was born not of treaties or politics, but of necessity and curiosity. Soon, breakthroughs emerged, medical treatments that neither race could have achieved alone. Outside the labs, the world watched. Some humans embraced the refugees wholeheartedly. They're our partners now, one teacher said on a global broadcast, holding up a tablet where Klyari children traced human letters. We're learning together. Others, however, grumbled. We're feeding aliens while our own people still struggle. One protester shouted in Chicago. Why should Earth risk angering the galaxy for them? The debates grew louder, but the Klyari never forgot who had offered them a chance when no one else would. To prove their worth, they shared knowledge that stunned humanity, blueprints for compact energy cells, theories of propulsion, and above all, data about the empire that had destroyed them. Commander Lena Ortiz studied the files in a secure orbital command room. Vast streams of tactical reports scrolled across her screen. Battle patterns, weaknesses, blind spots. They gave us this, she asked Elirath, who stood beside her. He nodded. We have nothing else to offer but our minds. If humanity must bear the burden of protecting us, then let us give you what we can, the knowledge of our enemies. Ortiz leaned back, her jaw tight. The Council will not forgive this. They'll call it collusion, rebellion. Perhaps, Elirath said softly, but they have already judged us unworthy of life. What more can they take from us? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. A month after the Klyari's arrival, a fleet appeared at the edge of the Sol system. Sleek ships bearing the sigil of the Tall Dominion, stone-skinned conquerors, enforcers of the Council's will. Their message echoed across every channel. Surrender the Klyari. Hand over the parasites, or Earth will pay the price of defiance. The ultimatum shocked humanity. Panic swept through cities, markets collapsed, and pundits argued on every channel. Some urged capitulation. We cannot stand against the galaxy, they cried. Others, fiercer voices, rose in defiance. If we surrender them, we surrender ourselves. The assembly convened in emergency session. Ely Rath sat in silence, prepared for the words he had heard 100 times before: rejection, abandonment, betrayal. But this time, the vote was swift. The Speaker of the Assembly stood, her voice ringing with steel. The Klyari are under humanity's protection. If the Council demands their lives, then Earth shall answer. We will not hand over those who sought our shelter. Ely Rath felt his heart stop. Around him, his people wept, not with fear, but with gratitude so deep it hurt. For the first time, someone had chosen to stand with them. When news reached the Dominion fleet, their commander laughed. Humans? These primitives dare defy us? Then let us remind them of their place. But in orbital command, Commander Ortiz smiled grimly as she studied the Klyari files. Already, new strategies formed in her mind, ways to fight not with superior firepower, but with human unpredictability sharpened by Klyari insight. For centuries, the galaxy had dismissed the Klyari as weak. Now, with humanity at their side, they would prove that strength was more than muscle and metal. The bond between the fragile and the stubborn had been forged, and together, they would show the galaxy what it meant to stand unbroken. The Unbreakable Bond. The Dominion fleet descended on the Sol system like a storm. Dozens of warships, armored and bristling with weaponry, swept past Pluto and drove toward Earth with cold efficiency. Their commander, Admiral Kragth, transmitted one final message: deliver the Klyari, or your world will burn. The threat echoed across Earth, replayed on every news feed, every broadcast. Fear surged like a tidal wave, but beneath it grew something else: defiance. In Nairobi, Klyari children held signs drawn with shaky hands: "Thank you, humans." In New York, crowds chanted in the streets. Not one surrendered. And in orbit, the United Terran Navy mobilized. For the first time in history, humanity prepared not just to defend their planet, but to defy the entire galactic order. Commander Lena Ortiz stood on the bridge of the UTS Resolute, her jaw set as the fleet assembled. Around her, human officers worked in quiet determination. On her right, Ely Rath stood, draped in the ceremonial sash of the Klyari, though his frail hands trembled. They will come with overwhelming force, Ely Rath warned softly. They believe you cannot withstand them. Ortiz smiled without humor. Then we'll prove them wrong. You've given us their patterns, their tactics. They expect us to fight like everyone else they've crushed. We won't. For months, human engineers had worked with Klyari scientists to adapt strategies, build countermeasures, and exploit the weaknesses buried in Dominion doctrine. Humanity's weapons were primitive compared to galactic standards, but guided by Klyari insight, they became something far deadlier. Railguns loaded, missile tubes armed, electronic warfare suites hummed to life. The fleet bristled with readiness, not because they believed they were invincible, but because they refused to surrender. The battle began at Saturn's orbit. The Dominion fleet surged forward in a wedge, their firepower hammering outward in disciplined waves. Their ships were larger, faster, and shielded by technologies humanity had only begun to understand. Against any other foe, it would have been a slaughter. But the humans fought differently. Instead of standing in rigid lines, they scattered into unpredictable formations. Instead of trading fire directly, they feinted, retreated, then struck from angles the Dominion had never anticipated. Guided by Klyari data, Ortiz's fleet exploited blind spots in sensor arrays, slipped missiles through shield harmonics, and turned their supposed weaknesses into weapons. The first Dominion cruiser exploded in a flare of fire, torn open by a coordinated human strike. Gasps rippled through the galaxy as transmissions carried the images far beyond Sol. The primitive race had drawn blood. On Earth, billions watched the battle unfold in real time. Fear gave way to awe as humanity refused to break. In refugee camps, the Klyari wept openly, holding each other as they saw humans fight and die not just for their own world, but for theirs. In the assembly chambers, leaders who had once hesitated now stood together, declaring before the galaxy, "We are human. We do not abandon those who seek our shelter." If you would call us weak for protecting the fragile, then know this. Our compassion is our strength. Admiral Cragg grew furious as more of his ships fell to tactics he could not comprehend. They are primitives, he roared. Crush them. But no amount of rage changed the outcome. Humanity would not yield. Every time a ship fell, two more took its place in the formation, their resolve hardening with every loss. And at the heart of it all, Ortiz stood like iron. Tell Cragg, she ordered, that if he wants the Klyari, he'll have to go through us. The battle raged for hours until, one by one, the Dominion ships began to retreat. They had expected an easy victory. Instead, they had been humiliated by a species they had dismissed as inconsequential, and by the knowledge of a people they had cast aside as weak. For the first time in memory, the Council's enforcers turned their backs in defeat. Silence fell across the fleet. Then cheers erupted, both from human throats and Klyari voices alike. Elirath bowed his head, overwhelmed. They will come again, he whispered. The Council does not forget humiliation. Ortiz nodded. Let them. Next time, they'll know humanity stands with the Klyari. Weakness. She glanced at him, her eyes fierce. No. Together, we're stronger than they ever imagined. Weeks later, as Earth rebuilt and mourned its dead, Elirath stood beside Ortiz on a balcony overlooking Geneva. The city lights glowed beneath a peaceful sky. When we came here, he said quietly, we expected rejection. We expected to fade away, forgotten by history. Instead, we found something greater than sanctuary. We found allies. We found family. Ortiz placed a hand on his shoulder, careful of his fragility. You found humanity, she said simply. Elirath looked to the stars. For the first time in his life, they no longer seemed cold and endless. They called us fragile, he murmured. But with you, Commander, we are unbreakable.